Welcome to today's story. This is a simple and enjoyable way to learn English listening instead of studying. When you enjoy the story, your English improves naturally. The morning started like any other Tuesday, with the pale sun filtering through my bedroom curtains and the distant hum of city traffic. I reached for my phone to check the time, but the screen remained black and unresponsive despite my repeated attempts to wake it up. Thinking it was just a dead battery, I plugged it in and headed to the kitchen to start my coffee routine. My roommate Sarah was already there, staring blankly at the toaster, while the smell of burnt bread filled the small room. I said good morning and asked if she had seen my charger, but she didn't even turn her head to acknowledge I was there. It was as if I were a ghost, drifting through the apartment, completely invisible to the person I had lived with for 3 years. I laughed, thinking she was playing a prank on me because of the silly argument we had the night before about the dishes. But when I tapped her shoulder, she jumped back with a look of genuine terror, asking me who I was and how I had gotten into her home. I tried to show her our shared photos on the fridge, but my face was missing from every single one of them. I stood there frozen, watching her reach for her phone to call the police, her eyes filled with the kind of fear you only see in strangers. I ran out of the apartment before she could finish dialing, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The hallway felt longer than usual, the familiar scent of floor wax and old mail suddenly feeling cold and clinical. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, hoping the fresh air would clear the fog in my brain and prove that this was all just a bad dream. I saw my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, walking his golden retriever, a dog that usually barked with joy the moment it saw me. Today the dog walked right past my legs without a single wag of its tail, sniffing the pavement as if I didn't exist. I called out to Mr. Henderson, waving my arms to get his attention, but he simply adjusted his glasses and kept walking toward the park. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I realized that the world hadn't changed, but somehow my place in it had vanished. Every person I passed looked right through me, their eyes focused on their own destinations and their own private lives. I even tried to stop a bus I usually take, but the driver didn't even glance at the stop where I was standing. I sat down on a public bench, clutching my knees, trying to understand how a lifetime of connections could disappear in a single night. Desperate for a familiar face, I decided to walk to the small bakery where I had worked for the last 4 years. The bell above the door chimed with a cheerful ring that felt like a mockery of my current state of mind. My boss, Marco, was behind the counter, dusting flour off his apron and shouting orders to the kitchen staff. I walked straight up to the register, forced a smile, and told him I was sorry for being late for my shift. Marco looked at me with a polite but distant expression, the kind he reserved for tourists who were lost and looking for directions. He told me that they weren't hiring and asked if I wanted to buy a croissant or if I was just passing through. I tried to remind him of the holiday party we had just last week, or the way I always helped him close up on Friday nights. He shook his head slowly, his brow furrowed in confusion, and told me he had never seen me before in his entire life. I looked at the Employee of the Month plaque on the wall, and where my name used to be, there was only a blank, polished brass surface. I backed away from the counter, the smell of fresh bread suddenly making me feel sick to my stomach as I realized my livelihood was gone. I spent the afternoon wandering through the city park, watching families play and couples hold hands under the shade of the oak trees. I saw my ex-boyfriend sitting on a blanket with a book, the same book I had given him for his birthday only 2 months ago. I approached him slowly, my voice trembling as I whispered his name, hoping that love might be stronger than whatever curse had fallen upon me. He looked up from the pages, his eyes clear and neutral, showing not a single flicker of recognition or shared history. He asked me if I was looking for the rose garden, his voice kind but entirely devoid of the intimacy we had shared for nearly 2 years. I looked at the silver ring on his finger, a gift from me, and realized he probably didn't even remember where it had come from. I tried to mention our favorite restaurant or the trip we took to the mountains, but he just looked uncomfortable and began to pack his things. I turned away before he could see the tears welling up in my eyes, feeling a profound sense of loneliness that words cannot describe. The sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the grass, mirroring the twisted reality I was now forced to inhabit. I realized then that memory is the glue that holds society together, and without it, we are all just drifting particles in a vast, empty space. As night fell, I found myself standing in front of my parents' house, the porch light glowing like a beacon of hope in the darkness. I hesitated at the gate, terrified that the 2 people who brought me into this world would also look at me with the eyes of strangers. I knocked on the heavy wooden door, and my mother answered, wearing the blue sweater I had bought her for Mother's Day. She smiled politely and asked if I was there for the charity drive, her voice warm but lacking the maternal spark I knew so well. I stepped into the entryway, pointing at the family photos on the wall, searching for my own face among the framed memories. To my horror, the photos had changed. Where I should have been standing, there was only a blank space or a different child I didn't recognize. My father came into the hall, asking who was at the door, and his gaze passed over me as if I were nothing more than a shadow on the wall. I tried to scream my name, to tell them about my childhood bedroom or the scar on my knee, but the words felt hollow and meaningless to them. I didn't try to explain or argue any further. I simply turned around and walked back out into the cold night air. The realization that even my own blood had forgotten me was a weight so heavy it felt like I was sinking into the earth itself. I walked to the pier, the sound of the crashing waves providing a rhythmic soundtrack to my growing despair and confusion. The moon was full and bright, reflecting off the dark water in a way that made the world feel beautiful and cruel at the same time. I looked at my reflection in a puddle of rainwater on the wooden planks, relieved to see that I still had a face and a body. I was still real to myself, even if the rest of the world had decided that I no longer existed in their collective memory. I wondered if this was a permanent state, or if I was simply caught in a glitch in the fabric of time that would eventually reset. I thought about all the things I had taken for granted: my name, my reputation, and the simple comfort of being known by others. I realized that our identity is not just something we carry inside us, but something that is reflected back by the people we love. Without that reflection, I felt like a painting that had been wiped clean, leaving only a blank canvas waiting for a new story to be told. I sat there for hours, watching the tide come in and out, wondering if I should just start a new life in a new city where being a stranger was normal. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind, trying to find a sense of peace in the absolute freedom of being a total stranger to the world. When the sun rose the next morning, I was curled up on a park bench, shivering from the morning dew and the lack of sleep. I walked back toward my apartment, not because I expected anything to be different, but because I had nowhere else to go in this silent city. As I reached the front door, I saw Sarah standing outside, looking frantically up and down the street with a worried expression on her face. She spotted me and ran over, throwing her arms around me and crying out that she had been looking for me everywhere since yesterday. She asked where I had gone and why I had left my phone behind, her voice full of the familiar warmth and concern I had missed so dearly. I looked at her, stunned, and realized that the world had returned to normal just as quickly and mysteriously as it had broken. I didn't try to explain where I had been or what I had experienced, knowing that she would never believe the nightmare of being forgotten. I simply held her back, grateful for the simple, beautiful reality of being recognized, being named, and being loved by another human being. We walked up the stairs, and I noticed my name was back on the mailbox, written in the same messy ink as before. We walked back into the apartment together, and for the first time in my life, I truly understood the incredible power of a simple hello from a friend. If you enjoyed this story, take a moment to think about what you understood. What parts were clear to you? You can share in the comments what the story was about and how much you understood while listening.